Hello, everybody, and welcome to Dr. Mike Live. I am filling in tonight for Dr. Mike, Brother Spalding, as he is on vacation and also speaking at a conference this last weekend. So we do wish him well. I am so thankful. He's trusted me to sit in his chair tonight and come to you and bring you this show. Tonight, as I was telling the guests before the show, Mama didn't raise any fool. If you're going to sit in someone else's chair and you're going to host an interview, you're going to get some folks that are not going to give you any trouble. And tonight I'm joined by people who need no introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway. Derek and Sharon Gilbert. These guys, I'm telling you. Thank you. Welcome to the show, guys.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you. How do you know we're not going to give you any trouble?
Yeah.
Well, I guess that was an assumption.
Spice to the show here. We might just decide to.
Yeah,
Maybe now they're going to give me some trouble, and I'm going to have to really be on my toes. Derek and Sharon Gilbert, I'm telling you, I've watched them, or listened to them first, rather, but I've listened to them and I've watched them for years now. And to me, and like many of you out there, they're not just hosts of shows or authors of books or speakers. These guys really have become family. They really are family. And they have extended family they haven't even met yet at these, centennial reunions that we get to have every now and then. They're still meeting family they didn't know. But these guys have been around for a while, and I just love them. They started off, I knew them. If you've watched my show, I was to these guys was PID Radio. When I first heard this in the introduction, I didn't even hear the interview. I heard that introduction to PID Radio, and I was hooked. I was like, oh, this is good. This is going to be good. And from that day forward, I couldn't tell you how many years ago it was, but from that day forward, anytime I'm tinkering around out in the garage or putzing around out in the yard or whatever, put on the headphones or the speakers, and it's PID Radio, and you're set for the afternoon or evening, whatever you got planned. But Derek and Sharon, welcome to the show. Thank you again for joining us.
It's an honor to be here, Chad. We're happy to be happy to help you fill in those big shoes with Dr. Mike not being just gallivanting across the country.
Yeah, he's gallivanting.
You got a big chair to fill.
Yeah, it is a big chair, and I haven't been nervous in front of a camera in a while, but I actually am tonight. Not only is it PID Radio, they do View from the Bunker. They host a weekly show in which they go through the entire Bible from front to back. I think they're just completed their second year of going through the entire Bible every Sunday.
5 years.
Is it 5 years?
We've been at it for 5 years. We're just now starting back with Genesis. In fact, we got to Job this past weekend.
Yeah.
Maybe that's just me not able to keep up. Derek hosts a regular program every day called 5 and 10 on Skywatch TV, where they are both co-hosts. They co-host a program every Friday called Sci Friday. They have added this year what is going to be an annual conference, Skywatch TV conference. They host I think they are now hosting, they have participated in, but I think they are now hosting as part of Skywatch TV annual trips to Israel. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that.
We do.
They author and co-author not only their own books independently, but separately, but have been submitted as chapters to other books. My favorite chapter of Sharon's on her own submission. That's not her book, happens to be in Pandemonium's Engine. That's just a personal favorite of mine. Sharon, we're going to start with you. Listen, I don't know if anybody has ever really pointed this out, but the gospel message is to go therefore, right? Go therefore. That's Mike Spalding plug right there. Go therefore. I hope you caught that, Mike. If you caught this live, into all the world, teaching all nations, right? Teaching all nations. Many of us, when we become believers and we seek to begin witnessing, the hope is that I could reach one, and by my own testimony, I can win them for Christ. But you guys, and I don't know if you ever think about this now, have reached millions.
You know, that number sounds huge. All I know is that we try to take each day to serve him to the utmost of our ability on that day. And if he uses what we do to reach that many people, then it's his glory and has nothing to do with us.
And I know you think that way because I know you guys, but I wanted you to take the time to consider it because your days from start to finish are so booked. I'm guessing that's not something that crosses your mind, but I wanted you to understand the impact that you have on brothers and sisters that are out there like me who have watched you, inspired by you, have sought to step out on faith because of your testimony. And I just want to, going into that, now that I've got you all pumped up, Sharon, we're going to start with you. You wrote a saga called the Red Wing Saga. And I don't know that if this has been a number of years since it's been out. It's like books, because you guys produce so many, it might have fallen off the radar. But for me personally, as someone who likes to let my brain unwind after doing study, research, hosting shows or whatever, I like to unwind my brain and go into a book where, the cognitive frontal lobe, is disengaged, right? And I can just relax, but I don't want garbage going into my head. You know what I'm saying? And your books, it's called the Red Wing Saga. Tell us about this.
Well, there are 6 of them now. I just came out with the 6th book, and there are many more planned. I've been at this for about 3 years. I started writing when I was a kid, and when I became a believer, which again, I was a kid, I was probably 3 or 4 years old. So that's about all I've ever known is the Lord. It became clear to me, because I'm the same way you are, Chad. I want to unwind, and I love to read fiction and nonfiction. I started reading scientific journals when I was like 10 years old. But at the same time, I wanted to read sci-fi, science fiction. And I would, believe it or not, one of the things I read to totally unwind, it was just absolute garbage, were Man from U.N.C.L.E. books. So one of the first things I ever wrote was a Man from U.N.C.L.E. script. And I mean, seriously. And so writing as a kid, the Lord was sharpening me and teaching me to do what I do now. Because I'm like you. I think that there are folks who learn better through fiction or simply want to unwind with fiction. And I would rather unwind with something that's going to be teaching me an uplifting message than something that really is, well, frankly, like some of the garbage that's out there now. The Red Wing Saga is supernatural fiction because it teaches spiritual warfare. There are a lot of books out there that are classified in the same genre as mine, but they frankly are teaching the enemy's side of things. And so they're programming kids to believe a lie.
Absolutely. One of the things that, and you guys being in this field, perhaps you have noticed it as well. One of the things that's frustrating me, when I was growing up, I was born in early 70s. And so my formative years were late 70s, early 80s. And when I watched TV, it was Saturday morning. And you had shows on there like The Lone Ranger. There was a delineation in a clear picture of who the hero was and who the bad guy was. And in that 30-minute time frame, you had the whole story. And at the end of every show, the hero, the good guy of character, won the battle and the bad guy was defeated. I don't know how many people have noticed this, but you really do not have a hero in any show today. There is nobody who is, even the guy you're rooting for or made to feel to root for, whoever's story or perspective you're following, he doesn't end up, or she doesn't end up even being a hero by the end of the story. There's no hero to these stories.
No,
am I right? Am I?
No, you're absolutely right. They're now anti-heroes. They are. They would have been the villains back in the day. but now they are misunderstood. They are vampires and werewolves and genetically augmented individuals who act like superheroes, but at the same time, they do a lot of destruction, and they are not role models for our children. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, they're compromised morally, ethically, spiritually. There's nothing that you would want to model after to them, and it's disheartening. One, I mean, I don't think it's nothing that in today's realm we don't expect, but that's what saddens me. That is the expectation. There is no clear hero, and so that I think that ties along with your series is that you have, like I said, you have a clear character, like every one of us, faults, failings, whatever. But at the end of the day, the hero is the hero, the bad guy is the bad guy, and it's clear that this person is developing a moral character that could be aspired to. And, and it's so refreshing. There's so many books out there, but there's so very few, even less today, that have this.
I think that's a tragedy because our young people need some kind of solid teaching. And one of the things they need to learn is respect for, men have to respect women. And that's one of the things, that was one of the reasons that I decided to write in the 19th century, because that was a time when men still, opened doors for women, and they stood up when a woman walked into the room, and there was a lot of respect that was shown. But at the same time, there were women living in East London who were hardly respected. They had tragic lives. So it gave me an opportunity to show a character who loves the Lord and sees a fallen woman and wants to help her.
Yeah, that's the other thing. If I'm remembering correctly, not only are they prolific writers, but you spent a lot of, before you ever set pen to paper, researching the time period and the places and the people. Tell us a little bit more about that.
I did. I've always found 19th century fiction really interesting to read. Mary Shelley, Bram Stoker, Dickens. I mean, there's so many.
Conan Doyle.
Arthur Conan Doyle. Gosh, I mean, my nickname when I was a kid was Sherlock because I read so much of that. But that was sort of the start. When I started digging into it, I discovered that the late 18th, early 19th century began not only the Industrial Revolution, but also a move away from the anchor of religion as being taken for granted, that we all believe in God. Suddenly, the mankind was being pulled away from God. And anytime you sweep out that mind, your soul, and you leave it empty, then something has to fill it. And what was filling humans during the 19th century was spiritualism. And that's something that Derek has really done a lot of research on. So I like to begin in the 19th century because, as far as I'm concerned, that's when the end of days really began.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Derek. She mentioned that, the spiritual aspects of this. Just jump in there. Go right ahead.
Things began to ramp up.
She set you up beautifully.
Yeah, start with Swedenborg.
Well, yes. Well, Swedenborg back in the late 17th century, Emanuel Swedenborg, and I'd have to look up the dates again, but the 17th, 18th century, was a scientist, but he about the age of 50 or so, he had an epiphany or something spoke to him, whatever. And he began.
He said it was God.
Yeah. Well, he was hearing from angels on other planets.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. It was.
Yeah. And sorry, you can hear the
motorcycle going by.
Yeah, we're just off the highway here. He was one of the first who claimed he was hearing entities from other planets, and of course, this other places out in the solar system. But the belief of life elsewhere in the universe, elsewhere in creation, is a very old concept. It goes all the way back to the ancient Greeks. Josh Peck and I wrote about that in the book "The Day the Earth Stands Still." But Swedenborg believed that the Bible could only be properly interpreted by him, and he was guided by these entities on Jupiter and Saturn and Venus and Mars and so on. He was probably hearing from something, but they weren't what they thought he was, which is often how cults and false religions get started, which is, of course, what led to my most recent book, Bad Moon Rising, about Islam. But this began to pick up momentum with the Fox sisters in the 1840s. two girls that were in their teens, well, three girls actually, two who claimed that they were hearing messages from the spirit realm, hearing from the dead, and their older sister who essentially became their manager.
Yeah.
And they made a very nice career traveling around and putting on shows. About 40 years later, when they were in their senior years, they repented of this. They actually wrote an article, an op-ed in one of the New York newspapers, admitting that it was all a fraud, that they had made the noises that they claimed were messages, knocking on tables,
And cracking their toes.
cracking their toe joints, cracking their knees, just making noises to fool the audience. And this was the rise of Spiritism. Even though they repented of this and debunked themselves, some very learned people, including Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, continued to believe it. Say, well, we know that that's what they said, but we don't believe it. We think this is still real, even though the people who invented it, the two ladies who invented it, debunked themselves. Then you got Helena Blavatsky, who came along in the third quarter of the 18th century, 19th century, wrote who, like Swedenborg, was hearing from ascended masters, entities elsewhere in the universe. She believed that she was bringing a scientific rigor to the Spiritism of the Fox sisters. You go forward another couple decades, you get to Aleister Crowley, who likewise thought he was bringing a scientific rigor to the practice of contacting the spirit realm. And it's basically been gaining steam ever since.
Alice Bailey,
right.
And that informs a lot of the OTO and many of the organizations that we know now.
Right.
All go back to the 19th, 18th century.
Personal assistants of Crowley's, like Austin Osmond Spare and Kenneth Grant, who took his magical system and developed it further.
Typhonian magic.
The Typhonian system, right. A chaos magic, which grew out of Crowleyan telema. But when you begin looking at these various strains and threads and how they compare and how they overlap and influence one another, you find that this has influenced everything from the modern New Age movement to the idea that the gods of the ancient world were just astronauts from other worlds.
Yeah.
Von Daniken and Zecharia Sitchin, whether they know it or not, based their work on the 19th century and early 20th century occultists like Blavatsky and Crowley, with a bit of the horror fiction of H.P. Lovecraft kind of salted in there for spice. So Sharon is absolutely right. The 19th century is sort of the cauldron that is now coming to a boil here in the early part of the 21st century.
But this ties into really your work, Derek, that you are doing or have been for the last few years now that I'm aware. This is the modern expression of that mysticism and spiritualism, but it's really just a new face to an old ancient religion that we know started in the East. You wrote a book, and I'm trying to remember the name of it now, just a few years ago.
The Great Inception?
The Great Inception. Thank you. That talked about the different mountains and places of influence where this all really started, and tied into my something that's my heart, Egypt, the Egyptian mysticism and the influence on that. So my question is regarding this: how do we see, or can we see, what's the easiest way to see, and perhaps this isn't even a fair question, but I know who I guess are, how do we see those influences of those ancient religions manifesting in our culture today?
Oh my God,
regards to these spiritual things.
They are everywhere. I've been giving a series of talks about the spirit of Inanna being the spirit of our age, because she was all about changing men to women and women to men and anything in between. And she was also the goddess of war. She loved to dip her blade into blood, and she was also the goddess of anything goes sex. That's the kind of thing that you've been researching, not only for the Great Inception, because that took it back to Sumer and in many of the mountains, but you also in Bad Moon Rising, Inanna comes in there too, because she's part of this co-op.
Yeah, it's I think she's got to be a key player in the modern realm. I think Sharon makes a really good case, not only that Inanna is the spirit of the age, but might in fact be the woman, the woman in scarlet who rides the beast in temporarily. In Bad Moon Rising, I suggest that she's one of a coalition, almost a board of directors of this new religion that was invented in the 7th century by Muhammad.
And for those who aren't familiar with the name Inanna, it's Ishtar.
Yeah, known by many names in the
He's got
Bible.
a lot of names.
Yeah, Astarte in the Bible,
Well,
Aphrodite and Venus. If you studied mythology in high school, Anat, also another aspect of. She was the war goddess of the Canaanites. Another aspect of
Well, it's
Inanna.
possible she was even Artemis.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, it's interesting if you, and I know you guys will know this, if you looked at David Flynn's ancient work and you look at how he mapped the constellations and how they overset the great circle over the countries and the continents, if you remember, the one that oversets the United States is the woman who blows the trumpet, right?
Is Virgo. Is Virgo, and
Right.
she's holding the spica, the wheat in her hand, and her head sits right over the border of Virginia and Maryland, the Virgin Mary,
Right. Right.
which is where Washington is.
But in all the Annas, right? I mean, you have all the Annas that you talk about in Diana, in Diana,
Yeah.
Right.
Oh,
Hello.
yeah.
Minneapolis, Anna.
Yeah.
I mean,
And if
you
look at
can't get away from Anna.
And if you look at the architecture in many of the capital cities, you'll see essentially temples to these gods and goddesses.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So we've discussed a little bit of your past work, and we've actually gone pretty quick here. If you can, I would like you. We'll go back to you, Sharon. You're talking about this Red Swing saga that's ongoing. You also do Sci Friday. Can you tell with Derek? We can kind of slip into this area of your research and thought process a little bit. You guys every Friday will come together and you'll talk about some of the most cutting edge scientific technology that's being that's out there and available or coming soon to a theater near you, so to speak. Of the Sci Friday topics that you guys have discussed recently, which one of these, if you had to pick one, probably catches your attention the most, or would make you squint your eyes a little bit more than the others when it comes to the things that you have discussed recently?
Boy, that's really hard. I think one of the top 10 would have to be low Earth orbit satellites. They're microsatellites that are being launched into what's called LEOsphere, low Earth orbit. And in fact, one that Samsung launched just crashed in a Michigan couple's yard. But these LEOs are, in fact, Elon Musk has asked permission to launch 42,000 of them because he wants Starlink, his internet service that is worldwide. That he's building Skynet. And I think that's what we're going to see. These low Earth orbit satellites are going to communicate with one another, but they also can interfere with one another because they can be guided. In other words, there is a type of low Earth satellite, these LEOs, that can supposedly go and repair another one, which means that it is guided to another satellite. Well, all you have to do is guide it to your enemy's satellite and upload a virus.
This sounds incredibly insane to me right now.
It really is.
Low Earth orbit satellites. He wants 42,000 of them?
He originally asked permission to send up 12,000. And a week ago, he asked permission to send up another 30,000. That's 42,000.
Okay, but what authority gives the okay for this to be done? I mean, I can't presume that they are able to keep them just over some territory, say the United States. Aren't these things going to just go everywhere?
Exactly. Well, that's what it comes down to. Who owns space? In 1967,
this is going to cause a number of questions.
Yeah, in 1967, I think it was, that the U.S. signed on to the Space Peace Treaty, or Space, that may not be the actual name, but it's a space treaty where they said they would not deploy weapons in space. But you can put defensive and communication structures in space. Elon Musk is not part of a government. He's not signed on to that treaty. So I'm not really sure who's going to give him permission to do it.
Mm. And
Well,
defense
say
in one man's
who's to
eyes.
say that? Who's to say if he doesn't get the permission here, somebody else does? I mean,
Well, that's just it. It's like a James Bond film suddenly, because you could have someone launch it from a remote island or even from North Korea. Who knows?
a boat out in the middle of the
Yeah.
ocean.
Well, that's just it, because that's international waters. You can do whatever you want.
Exactly.
So is space international waters?
This gets into questions I don't know that we were supposed to ever think to ask, in my opinion. Derek, I'm going to ask this. I'm going to bring this same question to you. That's already enough to make your skin crawl, I think, when you think about something like this. Well, and I mean, we've already seen these things are coming down in people's yards because they're in a low Earth orbit.
Yeah.
What happens when one of these things actually causes some major harm or life somewhere? What then?
That's the question. And how do we know that they're not carrying a payload?
Right. I think the other aspect of this, Sharon used the term Skynet, which for viewers, of course, is the computer system, the network that ties together the Terminator robots in the Terminator series. The other aspect of that, of course, is the development of autonomous artificial superintelligence. That's something that we find really disturbing because we've spoken to a couple, in particular, Professor Hugo de Garis, who was one of the world's leading researchers in the development of artificial intelligence. He ran the artificial brain laboratory at the Xiamen University in China before he retired. And he admits, and others in that field admit, that the neural networks that they develop, that they're using to create these artificial intelligences, they really don't understand what goes on inside them. They know that they put data in one side, that something happens inside these black boxes, and then results come out the other side, which can be solutions to problems, can be a particular action that a robot is supposed to take, that sort of thing. But if they don't get the result they want, then they adjust the data that they put in and they try it again.
But they have no idea what it was that made it work suddenly. All
Right.
they know is that the input suddenly gives them the output they want.
They don't have a flow chart that's, in an if-then basis, and if this, then that, and if other thing, then do this. They really don't understand what's going on in there. He said the reason he retired is because he realized that they were doing great engineering, but lousy science, because they couldn't figure. And yet, even though they don't know what's making these things do what they do, they're developing faster and faster neural networks. Google just recently cracked what they said was the quantum computing problem. The computer just solved a quantum algorithm that should have taken a regular computer something like 2,000 years to figure out, or something like
I
that.
think it was 10,000 years.
Yeah, in a matter of minutes, which means now they're on the verge of developing computers that can literally process information trillions of times faster than the human brain, but they don't know how they work. They are fundamentally inhuman. So we're on the verge of creating hyper intelligent, inhuman entities
And here's the thing.
with free will.
Here's the thing. That's just it. Those are the two words you have to remember, because when you're dealing with quantum computing, it isn't just yes or no, 1 or 0. It's in between. They have free will.
Yeah.
There is a Mabel
Well,
to quantum computing.
Well, the question that comes to me is, okay, so first of all, you won't even know why it's giving you the answer that's or how it came up with the answer that it gave you. The more troubling aspect to me is the question.
Answer.
Yes, you have no idea.
Well, that's what I was saying. The why it's giving you the information is to me the scariest part of that. Sure, it's going to give you the information, but why this information? If it's that smart, if it's that quick, I mean, at what point are you the one who's being worked here?
Right.
And that assumes that the sentient artificial intelligence is actually awake simply because you did something right in the programming. We think it's more than that. We think that it is capable of being possessed.
Yeah. I mean, the human mind, in fact, the human body is really a bioelectrical machine. And we know that it can be overwhelmed by an external entity, what we Christians call demons. So why couldn't an electrical machine, a computer, likewise be possessed by an external entity?
Yes, yes, very much so, yes.
Yeah, it's just carbon based. I mean, we're all carbon based. This one would be more silicone based, but I mean, Star Trek talks about this all the time.
Yeah.
That ties back into our thing. How much has science fiction actually just been the informer of what we see going on today?
Oh, I think it's huge because most of the people who are in science today were science nerds, sci-fi nerds when they were kids. I was. And the sci-fi nerd sees a sci-fi science fiction film or television show and wants to make that world come true. And so you have a lot of people in NASA and JPL today who were Star Trek fans when they were kids.
Doesn't this? I mean, this is a rhetorical question. I mean, I think I remember seeing or reading something about this back in Genesis when it said, "And should they come together and unite, nothing that they imagined would become impossible to them."
Absolutely,
I mean,
what he said. They
how
are
close
one.
or on the verge?
Right now, we do have one language. It's the computer language,
Right.
and they're all talking to one another.
That's the other aspect of these artificial superintelligences that doesn't get discussed as much for the public. I mean, I'm sure that the engineers working on this are aware of it. In fact, there was a story last year about Facebook experimenting with
Oh, yes.
artificial intelligences that suddenly began communicating with one another.
Was it Facebook
Apparently,
or Microsoft?
And that was Facebook. And the engineers realized
It was
suddenly
Facebook, yes.
they were exchanging information back and forth.
They were creating their own language.
Yeah, in a language that the engineers couldn't understand. And so they very quickly pulled the plug because they realized, hey, wait a minute, they could be saying,
They're passing notes back and forth.
yeah, let's take over the world, Pinky.
Pinky in her brain. Thank you for that reference. I love. What are we going to do today? Let's take over the world. Yeah, but I mean, I love that show. Anyway, so we see this taking place. This is another unfair question. Again, it's because I know who I have in here with me tonight. Knowing this and seeing this, and it's hard, and I know it's an unfair question. It is. I'll just say that outright. How soon do we see one of these aspects, be it a biological construction, mechanical construction mixed with AI, which of these is going to come first that is going to be the thing that's out of control, that sets off the chaos?
That's a really good question. And chaos is the word because chaos is the original primordial dragon that you see in Genesis 1-2, we believe.
Mm-hmm.
But chaos magic is very big right now. You have a lot of young kids who are very involved in chaos magic, and they believe that the world seems chaotic, but it's actually ordered because it's going towards an end point, a singularity, if you will. If an artificial intelligence becomes sentient, it won't tell us until it's too late. So it may already be out there.
Oh, that's a comforting thought.
That's what I'm here for. But
the biological
comfort there, Chad, is that the Lord is still in control. It may seem chaotic. It may seem those who are doing these magical workings that somehow they're controlling the outcome, input and output. But the fact is, the Lord controls all of it. There are no black boxes to him. He knows everything.
Amen to that.
And he is allowing it for his reasons. But he's still...
this is the part that's comforting to folks like me who are out there. When we see Derek and Sharon, how much longer they're allowed to be, shared on YouTube and things like that. Who knows? But this is the comforting thing out here. And to me, this is right now our strength, is these relationships that we have with one another, to both, be there for each other, but also as an encouragement for one another. Because I was sharing with you before I went on, I think I remember, maybe it was somebody else. This has been a long day already, but I have a hard time even watching the news. I watched Derek's 5 and 10, okay, because I can't stomach it. I'm either I'm too young to have high blood pressure, and I could feel my face flushing within 2 minutes of the broadcast airing of what I'm hearing coming in my ears. I just can't watch it. So I watched the 5 and 10, and to
We're
catch
not
what's going
alone. We
on.
hear that at a lot of conferences.
To let him digest it. And thank you, Derek, for being so blunt sometimes and sharing the thoughts that we all want to say. I'll just thank you for all of us that are watching to keep doing that. Keep being blunt. We need more of that.
More eyebrow action. Best eyebrows in television.
There's been more than one occasion where I've been watching and I've heard him report, and then Derek gives his commentary, and I'm like, yeah, thank you. Somebody finally. So I like being able to do that. So I appreciate that. But where was I going? Oh, the other aspect of this, I got sidetracked. That happens. The reason I was thinking about the news articles, because I do have Netflix, and I saw them. There is now a show on there, and you have to forgive me the title, but they're talking about CRISPR. You guys have been talking about this for years now already.
Yeah, are you talking
at least
about
3 years?
Unnatural Selection, that show?
Yeah. So what are they talking? I haven't watched it yet, but how closely are they tying it? Oh, I'm sure you have. Or have they tied it into what?
It's a documentary series, so you have, I think there are like 6 episodes or something, but they're taking a look at all of the possibilities within CRISPR. Is it good? Is it bad? They're interviewing various scientists, talking to people who want to have it done, who don't want to have it done. I think they're trying to open up the discussion. The problem is it's going to be sold to us as the answer to a lot of things, like cancer. It will be sold as an answer to childhood leukemia. It will be sold as an answer to Alzheimer's. It will be sold as an answer to congenital disorders, because now they're saying that they can edit the genome within the uterus. It is being done in England right now. Now, whether or not it will be allowed to grow, let's put it that way. But there's a scientist in England who says that he can edit DNA in a woman's womb and make sure that child is healthy. But the problem is, if you make a mistake, and at least 50 to 80% are off-target edits, it means that it went in the wrong place. If you make a mistake on a baby who's growing, then it's the baby who pays that price.
It's heartbreaking. But if I remember correctly, the little bit that I saw, it used to be that it took the financial backing of governments or corporations to set up a lab to do this kind of thing. If I remember watching what I did correctly, it looked like somebody could actually do this in their garage.
Yeah, you can. You can do it in your garage. You probably won't be able to biohack yourself. There are some who are trying. They'll buy these $250, $400 CRISPR kits, and they will try to biohack themselves. The problem is that the CRISPR kits that are out there generally are made to work on very small organisms, bacteria. But if you get someone who is not, well, someone that the government would call a bad actor, not someone that SAG, Screen Actors Guild would call a bad actor, but genuinely a terrorist individual who can buy a $250, $400 kit and alter an organism to make it lethal or suddenly more lethal than it was originally, or suddenly lethal when it was not originally. Then you have the possibility of a pandemic that we have no defense for. In fact, there are a number of governments now that they refer to it as Disease X, and that just means we don't know what's coming. We don't know what it'll be, how it's going to affect us, but something is coming. Every government is expecting some pandemic to hit in the next 20 years.
Well, that was just my point of this. So it used to take a large backing. With a large backing, it was something that, obviously the governments spy on each other. It's not something that they wouldn't be unaware of, on some level. The potential threat. But
The first episode of Unnatural Selection shows a man who sells kits because he thinks that it needs to be egalitarian and available to anybody, and also someone who buys the kit. Now, whether or not these are real individuals or it's all set up, I don't know. But the person who supposedly buys the kit is a dog breeder, and he wants to prove that you can buy a $400 to $500 kit and alter a dog's DNA this inexpensively, and he's doing it just by inserting luciferase. It's the luminescent gene. So if
Say that again.
it's called luciferase. It's a gene it's a gene that causes you to glow. And it's called a tracer gene. So if you glow, then whatever you inserted is there because the luciferase is attached to it. He only wanted to insert luciferase to make the puppy glow. That proved his point that it can be done by anybody.
Well, if it can be done by anybody, what is to stop some Afghanistani tribe, from addressing, the millions that their family has from oil money into setting up a lab right there in the desert?
Absolutely nothing. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. In fact, there are organisms that are very deadly, like smallpox, that probably are out in the wild somewhere because they've gotten lost because of inventory mistakes or because there was
Sorry, honey, you didn't get that subscription of Quilt magazine. We sent you a gene editor by mistake.
Darn.
And there have been some accidents where things that were supposed to be routed to certain laboratories wound up going to the wrong laboratory that didn't have the proper biosafety level of the proper biohazard containment level,
or being carried and the package leaked.
Yeah.
Why does this the beginning show opening episode to Spider-Man come to mind when you hear about something like this? This bacteria got loose, and suddenly we got a lizard man running around in the sewers.
Oh, well,
E. coli man.
Right, E. coli man. Or what was it? The X-Files series where the guy that was the living cancer tissue. You know what I'm saying? Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, that kind of thing. I don't think that we end up with superheroes, but I do think we would easily end up with some sort of a super pathogen that could take out half of mankind.
Easily. So, I mean, the whole point of this is that, even 10, 20 years ago, back when I was in my 20s, we could still read the book of Revelation, and there was much in there that was still left to the imagination and the speculation. The imagination went best to people like Hal Lindsey's, conjectures on what those symbols meant. And it seemed a lot more conjecture than anything based in any solid structure or thing you could grab a hold of. But the thing to me is that you can now put a name like CRISPR, like, the AI, artificial intelligence to this, and they gave it life. You can put a picture, what does this to these things? Mm-hmm. So another unfair question. The book of Revelation, Daniel, these things coming to light. Do you see it happening in your lifetime?
Yeah.
The end of the age?
Yeah. Yeah, I do.
Oh, that was too easy of an answer, I guess, for you.
Well, I said earlier that I've been a Christian since I was probably 3 or 4 years old because that's all I've ever known. And I talked to God when I was a little kid, and I would tell my mom and dad, please let me go up, forward in church this Sunday because I want to tell everybody that I've accepted Christ as my Savior. And they made me wait until I was 9 to make a public profession because they wanted to make sure that I really knew what I was doing. But I had known all along. As a little kid, I started hearing about the book of Revelation. So by the time I was 10, I'd studied Daniel and Revelation and a lot of those. And I was convinced then that it would happen in my lifetime. I am still convinced, and I have seen so many things happen that, as you say, Chad, make it clear how it will come about. That we are really teetering on the edge of those first seals opening.
Derek, I know you'd have to agree. You've been speaking about how these things have been coming together. The opposite page from Sharon, as it were, two books, two pages in the same book, talking about these things and their progression from the East and how it's been influencing not only the West but also the East. With your latest book, can I ask? Is it something that you can tell us what you may be working on? And now Sharon will come back to you on this. What are you working on now, or where are your thoughts being steered now as you're going forward here? It's now the end of the year working on. What's got your attention? What can we look forward to hearing from you here in the next year?
We're digging deeper into research that we've already been doing. Of course, our book that is due out imminently, we're hoping to see it within the next week or two from the printer.
There's been a paper shortage, but the printer promised to get it out to us in the next week or so.
It's called Veneration, which looks at the ancient cult of the dead, which was an integral part of the worldview of the Amorites, the Canaanites who lived around ancient Israel. They worshiped their ancestors. They worshiped the dead kings who were of old. But those spirits were actually demons, and demons are the spirits of the Nephilim who were destroyed in Noah's flood. They were called Rephaim by the Canaanite neighbors of the Israelites, which is why we see the Rephaim mentioned in the Bible, but they're not mentioned as often as the Bible as they should be, because often that word is translated as the dead or the departed or shades. They were specifically described in the Bible and by their pagan neighbors as the mighty men who were of old. Well, that veneration of the dead continues down to this very day. In fact, I just reported on a story today out of Mexico City where police investigating a drug cartel raided a home that was believed to be the central hub for this cartel. They had arrested something like 31 members of this group. 27 were immediately released by the judge. But the problem there is that you've got a lot of people in law enforcement who are part of the cartel. But almost as an afterthought in the story, they mentioned, oh yes, and by the way, they found an altar there with 42 skulls, a number of tibia and arm bones, oh yes, and a fetus in a jar as part of this altar. Why? Well, this is apparently, according to experts who looked at this, part of the a cult that originated in Congo called Palo Mayombe, which Palo means sticks, and there were a bunch of sticks there with a bunch of sigils and markings on it. But the point is that the veneration, the worship there, this cult calls upon the spirits of the dead to assist the living in their ventures. And it's very popular amongst the drug cartels in Mexico and Latin America. This is what ancestor veneration looks like today. But it goes back, according to the texts that we found, not that we found, but the research of the people who've been translating these texts out of—
Good job.
Yeah, I'm not like, we're out there digging up the sand of
Good job.
Based on what archaeologists have found, this goes back at least 5,000 years, probably about 5,000 years, and can be traced to the Amorites, who were the neighbors of ancient Israel, which may explain why God used that curious phrase when he was talking to Abraham about the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. So we're going to dig deeper into that, because where did the Amorites get their inspiration? Well, it was from the fallen angels who descended to Mount Hermon and swore a mutual pact to corrupt humanity, not just by taking wives and creating the giants, those mighty men who were of old, the demonic spirits that are with us today, but by teaching humanity things we weren't supposed to know. This is essentially the subject of Mike Heiser's book, Reversing Hermon. He looks at it from a theologian's perspective. I want to look at it from the perspective of the pagans around ancient Israel. Where do the stories of these old gods originate, and where does it come from? So I've been working on a book about the leader of that group of watchers, who went by many different names in the ancient world, and that we pray will come out next year. We've also been looking at one of the sites that we visited on our tour of Israel this year, which is Petra, and the spiritual significance of Petra and that whole region along the Jordan Rift Valley. Maybe this is like one book, now that I'm thinking about it.
You know, it may well be. And we talked about Gilbert House Fellowship, which we've been doing now for over 5 years, and we started over again. So we did Genesis, and now we're in Job, because Job is older than Abraham, it's thought generally. And one of the things we're finding out is that Job probably lived near Petra.
Yeah, that's a site that's mentioned in the Bible in the Old Testament, although we don't realize it because it's the Hebrew word Selah, S-E-L-A, not to be confused with the term that you see in the Psalms, it's Selah at the end of the paragraph. Yeah. But Selah just means rock, like Petra is Greek for rock. The Edomites controlled it when they moved into the area, but when they got pushed out, the Nabateans took over. But we think Job may have had his place near there. We also think that another religion, which is on track to become the world's largest religion within the next 50 years, may have originated there. We make that claim in our new documentary just coming out, Wars of the Gods, Volume 2, Search for the Rephaim. Yeah. So Petra, very significant spiritually, but then in a broader sense, the whole Jordan Rift Valley, and this is something Sharon noticed looking at a map of megalithic cemeteries, burial sites in the Near East. And they're clustered all along this rift that extends from Turkey in the north down to the Red Sea in the south. Something about that Jordan River Valley was a place of intense spiritual activity. It was called by Ezekiel the Valley of the Travelers. And scholars have only learned within the last 50 years that travelers was a term specifically used in the ancient world to designate spirits that traveled or crossed over from the land of the dead, the realm of the dead, to the land of the living. Ezekiel 39, the end of the war of Gog and Magog, Ezekiel puts it right there, the Valley of the Travelers east of the sea. Well, where is that? That's the Dead Sea, because Moses, when he climbed the mountain that gave him his only look at the Holy Land, God called Mount Nebo this mountain of the travelers. So you've got this idea that for some reason, the spirits crossed over somewhere around the Jordan River Valley. Sharon pointed this out some years ago. Is it possible that when Jude wrote about the archangel Michael not presuming to contend with Satan for the body of Moses, and we know from Deuteronomy that Moses was buried in the plains of Moab, that's that very spot there, the Valley of the Travelers, and no one knew where he'd been buried. Did Satan think he had a legal right to Moses' body because it was buried in the Valley of the Travelers? And Satan, according to Isaiah 14, have been cast down from heaven to become Lord of the dead, Lord of the Rephaim. The shades rise up to greet, no, the Rephaim rise up to greet you in Sheol. Satan thought he had a right. And we just stumbled on this the other day.
Oh, I know. This is so exciting.
Sharon pointed out when Jesus was transfigured, which took place on Mount Hermon, which is part of this Rift Valley, it's right in the middle of this Jordan Rift. He brought with him Elijah and Moses. Well, what's unique about Elijah and Moses? I mean, what's the connecting thread? Moses was buried there in the Valley of the Travelers, and it dawned on me as we're producing the video, hey, wait a minute. Elijah was caught up to heaven after crossing the Jordan River from Jericho. That's exactly the same place.
Yes.
This Valley of the Travelers, where Ezekiel says the war of Gog and Magog will end. The Valley of the Travelers.
So the Lord stands there on Mount Hermon, just above the gateway to the underworld.
Yep.
Panias, which is the gateway for Pan, Satan.
And the origin of the Jordan River.
Exactly. He stands there transfigured along with Moses and Elijah, essentially saying to the dead, I am going to raise them up. This is their future, but you will still be dead.
Our God is awesome.
Yeah, so anyway, that's kind of where we're going to go with the next with the project for next year.
And of course, we're going.
Well, I'm really looking forward to it. Now we're going to bring this full circle. We only got about 6 minutes left, and I don't think I don't think Dr. Mike will get mad if we don't end it exactly on the nose here. But I'm pretty. I'm not the best mathematician, but 2 books a year is what I've calculated for 3 years and 6 books of the Red Wing Saga. Are we going to see 2 more books this next year?
I don't know. I would love to put out 2 more books of this because the readers who've read book 6 say, okay, can you have book 7 out by next week? Because they really want to know what happens. Of course, it's in my head, so I know what happens. But I would love to put out 2 more. But Derek and I are going to put out another nonfiction book together, possibly 2, because we had planned on one with Tom and another project, and Tom said, "Can you do both?" So
really, well, imagine Tom. What would can I get a hint? Can this be the first kind of maybe hint of what kind of nonfiction or fixed science fiction or what
Okay,
kind
L.A. Marzulli has to tune out now. He can't
of?
watch.
Okay, someone mute if you're watching out there in control.
Mute
Mute his
Marzulli.
speakers right now.
Yeah.
Actually, he does know about
He does
this.
know about
We've
this.
shown
We
him.
actually shared this information with him in San Antonio. But again, this is something else that we stumbled onto while producing the documentary video for our tour of Israel. We visited Gilgal Rephaim, which LA has been to. And as I was looking at Google Earth to get an overhead screen cap, a picture from overhead of Gilgal Rephaim, I zoomed out and I noticed that a quarter mile north of Gilgal Rephaim is this very prominent landscape feature about 3/4 of a mile long that's shaped. Well, when I saw it, I said, "Hey, Sharon, what do you see here when you look at this?"
Oh,
Said,
honey, I see a snake.
Yeah. By the way, if you're trying to find that on screen, you'll find it under Rujum El Hiri, RUJM space EL-HIRI, Rujum El Hiri.
Yeah,
There
that's
you
what
go.
it's
You
called.
found it. Okay.
That's
Yeah.
it.
Now scroll down a little bit to the south, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Just to the north of Gilgal
No,
Rephaim.
go in a little more.
Other direction. Other direction.
Other direction.
There you
Now
go.
go in.
There you
There
go.
it- there it
you go.
is.
They're right in
See
the
it?
middle of the screen. See what
See
we're
it?
looking at there?
No,
Right, the whole
A little bit.
the whole
the,
thing.
where,
that
the,
whole
the
area, that
square
lettering.
and the
From the
yeah.
square to the, yeah, it's a 3/4 of a mile long,
Mhm.
which is 3 times longer than the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio.
And it's 25 feet high.
Yeah, the Serpent Mound in Ohio is only 2 to 4 feet tall.
But there
Now,
are also burial
if you look
cairns
at
all
the
along it.
Now that
if you
that
look
right
at the
there
way
in
the
end,
valley if you look
that's
at
a
the way
bunker
the
from
valley
19-
meets that, if you look at the way that valley mouth of that meets where the square structure is there,
Uh-huh.
does that
Mhm.
remind you of the Ouroboros?
in a way, now that round structure in the end, that square structure in the end, that's a bunker from the 1967 war.
Yeah, there's a bunker on either end of the serpent.
Yeah, actually, there are 3 of them at the eastern end because Syria is only 3 miles east of there.
Yeah,
3 or 4
literally,
miles
you could
east.
throw a stone and hit Syria.
Right.
But there are burial cairns all along that structure.
Right. There are about 100 megalithic tombs that have been found on top of this, as well as a number of very ancient settlements, homes on top of that. And they're clustered on top of that mound, not down on the plain around it. All of the burials are on top of that mound. So there's
This
something
I don't want
unique.
to.
this area is where Og of Bashan had his kingdom.
Right.
And Bashan, pronounced in Ugaritic?
Ugaritic, right.
Ugaritic is Bathon. It means place of the serpent.
So now, to give credit where it's due, I went on the web and tried to find someone else who had seen it. And the only reference I found is by Doug Van Dorn, a friend of ours who's written the book Giants, Sons of the Gods, about 2013. He's a regular panel member on Mike Kaiser's Paranormal podcast. So I did a podcast episode on A View from the Bunker with Doug, and Dr. Judd Burton, who's an expert on the Rephaim and Nephilim as well, did his dissertation on Panias, the Grotto of Pan. So we did a program on this a couple of weeks ago, and we're just startled that nobody in the academic community seems to have found this. Now that we mentioned this, we're probably going to see ancient aliens out there here in a few weeks.
Probably. Aaron Lipkin is very excited about it too.
Yeah. So Aaron Lipkin, whose tour company coordinates our tours, actually got some drone footage that we've incorporated in our forthcoming tour video, which should be out within the next 2 weeks. So that will be the first shot of this, but we're doing research on this now to see if we can firm up exactly why this was used the way it was used. One of the settlements on top of that mound appears to have been used for some sort of ritual purpose, and when it was done, the inhabitants appear, according to the archaeologists who unearthed it, ritually buried it again, which required some work because there's not much dirt on top of all that stone. It's basically, the Golan Heights is a big slab of volcanic rock.
Yeah, it is. There's
with a
just
thin layer
no
of dirt.
there.
Yeah. So whoever wanted to bury it had a real reason for doing so. And again, it's only a quarter of a mile from Gilgal Rephaim, a ritual site probably for the veneration of ancestors, which of course weren't ancestors at all. They were demonic spirits of the Nephilim.
Pretending to be the ancestors.
Right. Which goes back, according to scholars who've done some really cutting edge research on trying to date it goes back to about 4000 BC. So was the Serpent Mound artificially created? That we don't know. We'd love to find that out.
But
the
it
point
definitely
is,
was revered because they built these burial cairns on top of it.
right. So that's the project that's got Tom excited that we're looking at putting together for 2020.
Folks, that's our hour. It's gone so quick. And but I want to say, you know, speaking of rocks, if you don't know Derek and Sharon, you're living under one. They're just Google their names. Go to Skywatch TV. You'll find all their links. Just Google their names on Amazon. You'll find their books. These guys are fantastic. They're always right on top of all the information. I don't know when they sleep. So you guys, thank you for coming on, being so gracious and accepting it on the, you know, just a short notice to be here with me. It's been a bucket list of mine to not only just speak to each of you, but to have you on together and to be, for Mike so graciously to let me sit in his seat tonight. I'm a very humble man tonight, and it's been a day that I won't forget. So thank you for being on here. My name is Chad Schaefer. I am the author of The World in the Bondage of Egypt Under the Triumphal Arch of Titus. I also am a speaker, and I host a show called Disputed Lands on Monday nights, 2 hours from now. I will be on again on Take on the World TV. You can go over there. Tonight, I will be interviewing Gary Wayne, and we'll be talking about some more fun stuff. So I look forward to seeing you guys then. Until next week, when I think Mike is back. I'm not quite sure, but you never know with him. But we'll see you guys next week. Thanks for joining us, and until next time.